Our next presentation deals with using digital category management and continuity commerce to drive profitability. Our speaker is Charles Nichols, SVP of SAP Upscale Commerce at SAP. Charles, take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Very glad to be here. So that is a really long title. I mean, it talks about continuity commerce, it talks about digital category management, it talks about profitability. I don't think I've ever seen such a long title. But hopefully what we're going to cover today is some really interesting content to get you thinking, get the gray cells going, really around how we can drive direct-to-consumer type initiatives. The structure of what I've got here really in terms of, so you know where I'm going, is a little bit of direct-to-consumer in 2019. What does it look like? What are we thinking about? What's important? Where does it fit in the overall, big plan? And secondly, perhaps a little bit harder for many CPs, we find that consumer packaged goods companies and finished goods companies often struggle with the challenges of actually running a digital store. It's not necessarily in the DNA, more sort of a wholesale kind of environment, perhaps is normal DNA, and then selling individual consumers. There's some different skills there, digital merchandising type skills, which are important. So who's minding the store? We're going to look at that a little bit, and then think about how we might be able to leverage digital category management, so techniques basically to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. They'll be very familiar. If you're familiar with category management, which I'm sure many of you are, they'll be very familiar, but kind of taken the physical world and applied to the digital world. And category management gives you a great framework effectively for minding the store. Continuity commerce, or if you like, programs on auto ship, or maybe auto ship on steroids, if you like, or subscription kind of commerce, is a phenomenal profitability driver. And so we're going to look at how you can leverage that in conjunction with digital category management, really to then begin to drive profits, across the whole gamut. And then finally, I have one slide, a very brief introduction to SAP Upscale Commerce, because no doubt many of you will have questions, which is, okay, that sounds great, but can you actually do all of that stuff? Because you're talking magic here. So we'll show you maybe a little bit how the magic works. And finally, Q&A. And as John mentioned, we love questions. I love questions too. It's where some of the interactive part gets best. Some of the best content often comes out. So please do ask your questions as you go through. If you ask a spectacularly good question, or I'm not making something clear, then John will interrupt me. So I would say you win a prize for interrupting me. So ask away in the question panel. Looking forward to it. So let's start with a quick level set on direct-to-consumer in 2019. What does it look like, and what are we thinking about? I think about it really in that there are sort of three things happening, three truths, if you like, in being able to deliver experiences to customers. I mean, we talk about experience all the time. But experience increasingly defines the brand. We used to, have brand values and define our brand values, and we stick to those and we communicate those, and we still do that. But fundamentally these days, the brand is perhaps measured a little bit by what gets shared, in particular on social, and consumers are fickle characters, and they increasingly think about brands in terms of the experiences that they've had, and learn from their friends, and network effectively about what is good or what is not. So experience is really important, and delivering experience is challenging. I mean, it's a cross-channel, multi-device, kind of thing. And of course, customers don't really see those channels. They just think they're shopping the brand. So whether they're shopping on a marketplace, or whether they're shopping in retail, or whether they're shopping direct to consumer, they're shopping the brand, and they don't really care about that. They don't care about devices. They're just shopping the brand. So we have to really think about how we can make that as seamless and as frictionless as possible, because that is fundamentally what defines the experience. There was a study I saw published today in eMarketer, actually, which said that there is a big gap. I mean, they run this study regularly, and it says there was a big gap last year. There's still a big gap between what marketers think of the quality of their experience versus what consumers think, and there is a big gap there, and consumers really don't see great experiences often when marketers think that they're delivering them. So the devil is in the detail as to how we do that, in terms of how we deliver relevant experiences to the individual, and be able to do that across channels. And of course, consumers also rate convenience increasingly highly. the ability to buy products seamlessly across channels is one of those conveniences, but also the ability to return goods as well. And some of those logistical challenges come in there. Return logistics are a science in their own right. We could run a webcast just specifically to that. But those things can create phenomenal brand loyalty. For example, I will only have an HP printer in my house because the return logistics on HP is just so good that if ever it goes wrong, I absolutely know I'm covered. So increasingly, of course, as we think about convenience, then products become services and services become bundles of products. And therefore, that takes us very much into how do we sell a customer a service rather than selling them an individual product? And that takes you very much into the sort of the continuity commerce concept. So those are kind of the high-level views. And of course, really to deliver a great brand experience and of course profitability, then direct-to-consumer has to be part of every CPG's omni-channel go-to-market strategy. One of several strands, but undoubtedly the ability to then have a direct relationship will drive more profitability, for the brand, and also give you that all-important feedback loop as well. So one of the other big dimensions of consumers and consumer behaviors that is happening, of course, is that mobile is now the device. Just in case we weren't sure, it absolutely is. Just think about what's in your pocket all the time, and no doubt it's a mobile. You check mobile when you're on the train. 80% of millennials check mobile first thing in the morning. They take it to bed with them, and they probably check their mobile before they talk to their partner. We tuck it up, on the bedside table. Good night, little one. Sleep tight. So it's always with us, and you see that with traffic. 70% of the traffic is now on mobile, and therefore, as marketers, we have to be where our customers are. And if our customer is on mobile as their primary device, that's where we need to be. It's also, of course, very relevant for CPG and household replenishment because, if you, for example, you're doing the washing, you've probably got your mobile with you. If you're checking the air conditioning unit, you've probably got your mobile with you. So all of these things, when you think about either household replenishment or consumables, the mobile is the device where it's always with the consumer, and therefore it's the best device to reach them on, and it's the best device to somehow put that magical buy button on or subscribe button, which allows them to sign up for a subscription or buy a one-off and do that very easily and quickly. Of course, apps also are increasingly important because devices are connected these days, and many product lines or many retailers are now insisting that at least one product in the product line is connected. It's certainly in finished goods and electronics, and of course that means that there is an opportunity to create richer experiences and embed buy buttons in those connected devices to make it very easy to then purchase. So, of course, mobile experience today is not great. And if we think about it, it's really ripe for reinvention. And many of the existing commerce features were actually built for desktop and not built for mobile. You see some examples here. Data entry or checkout on a mobile device is really horrible. These are small screens, and I have fat fingers, and how do I make it work? And I've got to punch it, and it doesn't quite, the data doesn't go in correctly, and it's too hard. So I just give up, right? And that's the classic challenge. Of course, you also have much less real estate, so which products you show, those sorts of things become important. But also the way that you think about how you search through products, how you navigate through products, how you browse through products becomes really important. Facets, filters, drop-downs, checkboxes. These are all concepts designed for a horizontal screen with a keyboard and a mouse. And of course, what we've done is we've turned that 90 degrees, to the right, and we then squeezed it down onto this tiny little screen, taking all the same concepts with us. And needless to say, they don't work very well. And sure, we can space out the checkboxes so that the fat finger can make it work a little bit better. But really, maybe there's just a much better way to do it. I mean, the other thing to notice about this is not visual, right? And of course, the brain is visual. The way the brain works is much more visual rather than textual. And therefore, if you show products and you engage customers visually, they're much more likely to buy. Kind of really obvious, but it's important. So that begs the question, which is if you're thinking about direct-to-consumer, why would you build for a desktop platform when that's not where consumers are? If you're not already going direct, then there's an opportunity here actually to leapfrog, much as emerging markets kind of skip desktop altogether and go straight to mobile because that's where the consumers are. We can do the same thing. Of course, mobile apps have traditionally had a problem in that you have a big download. But there is this new thing called progressive web, or progressive web apps, or sometimes called PWA for short, which basically provides an app-like experience but running in a browser, and therefore with no download, right? So we don't have that download hurdle anymore, but we have all that finger-based navigation, the sort of tapping and pinching and swipe left and swipe right and all those sorts of things. And critically, one-tap pay or one-tap buy. Things like Apple Pay and Google Pay, also available now running in a browser. And that's absolutely the way to go forward because this is actually faster than a mobile web. It downloads stuff that you use frequently in the background. That's the progressive part of it, if you like. Rather than having a big download from an app store up front, then it allows you to then just begin using the app and it downloads the bits that you need and it just gets progressively faster the more you use it. Really, really nice experience, and you can deliver that in a great way. Of course, you still probably need native apps. Native apps are different in particular for connected devices, those sorts of things. But also, you get a great shopping experience from native apps where the content has been downloaded, and therefore, the combination of those two things are really powerful together. And with progressive web, this runs anywhere a browser runs. It means it runs on mobile or tablet and indeed on desktop. And therefore, or if you're a finished goods manufacturer and you want to embed this in a screen in the front of a fridge, you could do that too. So you've got all of those kind of capabilities. So progressive web is undoubtedly the way to go forward. And when you create a rich mobile app or, using progressive web, app-like experience, here you see the difference between that browsing that we were talking about earlier on, very text-based form filling versus something which is much more visual, where designed for fingers, I can navigate easily through products. And you combine that with a one-tap buy, using here shown an Apple Pay, but Apple or Google Pay or similar, then you can see dramatic increases in conversion. You've really taken out the friction of the process and you've made it much easier, and you see the results going directly through. You're not forcing customers to reshop, as in to switch from the mobile device because they can't figure out how to fill in the form, or it's just too much hassle. Then force them to switch to desktop when they remember, and then they go back to the site and they start all over again and reshop all over again, right? You just make it easy, sort of tap, tap, buy. That's absolutely where we're trying to get to. Big increase in conversion as a result. Okay, so that's a kind of a very quick intro into direct-to-consumer in 2019. Now, let's assume that you've got your store up and running. Well, then who's minding the store, and how do we optimize that? Think about all the things you have to do. There's a ton of things you have to do, particularly, of course, if you've not gone direct before, and therefore you've got a whole bunch of warehousing and returns logistics and customer support and things like that to think about as well, to make life a little bit more complicated. But how do you actually then mind the store? How do you optimize it? How do you make it work? Well, the traditional way of doing that is using web analytics, and you have this concept of of a funnel. You're probably very familiar with this, of course. Now, most people draw the funnel where the top part is much too narrow. The reality, when you look at your data, is that the bulk, the top of the funnel is very, very wide. It is absolutely, a cocktail glass, not a wine glass or something like that. It's very, very wide at the top and narrows down very sharply before getting to a sharp point at the bottom. And you see how traffic drops off really quite quickly, only 38% or thereabouts getting to a product detail page, only 11%, this is actually on desktop, getting to a cart. On mobile it's less because the visual browsing stuff hasn't really been rolled out fully yet. You get about 8% on a browser, on a mobile device, and about about half to 1% on a mobile screen, until you begin to bring in that rich browsing and that one-tap buy we talked about. So the traditional way of strategizing how we deal with the top and bottom of the funnel is at the top of the funnel, then we think about personalization and targeting and recommendations and those sorts of things, and when people leave, retargeting. And at the bottom of the funnel, then we obviously want to try and reduce friction, remembering payment details, those sorts of things, but also recommendations perhaps to increase the average order value. The challenge, of course, is that at the top of the funnel, which is where the bulk of the traffic is, most of the traffic, the vast majority, is unidentified. And therefore personalization actually has limited scope really to help you in that space. And as a result, it tends to be very broad-based, segment-based kind of targeting, which is very much looking at averages of what people put into carts and things like that. Maybe there's a better way to do that. And then by the time you get down to the bottom end, you've identified them, then really, there's only limited scope you have to then cross-sell and upsell. So I think the way that we're headed is we should really be trying to rethink the funnel, right? And digital category management and continuity really help us here. Because in particular, at the top half of the funnel, where we're working with unidentified customers, then we can use digital category management to really help us. Traffic generators which help us get the next click, right? Help us get products which specifically we know are proven to get customers to click down, from maybe the top through into landing, into the product detail page, etc. Equally, we know from old that if you put high velocity or best-selling products or high velocity and accelerating products and you give those high visibility, then customers are much more likely to get engaged. And the net effect of that is you can fatten out the funnel and make the sides not quite as steep and retain more traffic. You get more traffic to the cart and more traffic ultimately to convert. We can also think much more about what we need to sell. The inventory and margin picture, and we can make sure that we expose some of those specifically because retail is fundamentally about what we need to sell as much as what the customer's interested in. It's that balance between the two that we need to kind of strike. And of course then the concept of the third shelf, what assortment do we want to put in front of the customer in order to try and maximize profit and ensure that we sell out of key products and all those sorts of things. So the strategy at the top of the funnel can change and really begin to leverage digital category management. And then as we go down into the funnel, it's still reduced friction for sure, but here we want to leverage a one-tap buy. Maybe we can use AI-powered next sales instead of just trying to increase the average order value, but get customers on the path to actually increase their profitability. And maybe also at that point we want to turn single buyers into continuity buyers. And at that point, you begin to then get into the bottom of the funnel. And we've created a new part of the bottom of the funnel, which creates more of this sort of candlestick shape where, we turn a single customer into a recurring customer. And the math is really quite compelling. As we make this work, through a combination of techniques, then you can see, really quite amazing numbers. For products put on a continuity program, after the end of 12 months, with an optimized program, you can expect about 25% of your customers to be buying regularly on continuity. That increases orders, per year from maybe 1 to 2 up to 3 to 6, which has a knock-on effect in terms of product line revenue. Naturally, you're getting more wallet share, effectively pulling it away from your competition, and you can see a fifth to a quarter increase in product line revenue. And if from the forward visibility of demand, basically when you're going to ship products to different customers, that gives you effectively a whole chunk of inventory that you're going to need. If you can eke some savings out of your supply chain, let's just say a 10% savings there from doing that, you should be able to achieve that, then you can increase product line profitability by 30 to 40%. Wow. I mean, these are big numbers, right? This takes some effort. And this isn't kind of like all you're going to do is put up a subscribe box, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. When we talk about continuous commerce, you understand where that's coming from. But there is a lot of opportunity here. Now, for CPGs, as I said earlier on, DNA isn't necessarily to have a ton of digital merchandising DNA, in the company, and therefore that presents some of its own challenges. But if we just think about this broadly speaking, then today commerce is very, very manual, right? This is why who's minding the store is a problem. You talk to any merchandiser and they never have enough hours in the day to basically do all the things that they know they need to do. And as a result, you tend to rely on rules. Now rules, merchandising rules, many of them are set and forget, sometimes set up by a systems integrator, when the store first goes live and never touched. I know it sounds amazing, but it's absolutely true. And they're fundamentally simplistic and really ignoring the individual context of what a customer is looking at right now. So rules, whilst they help us, we should very much begin to think about how we can flip this around and think about rules as an override rather than being the norm, because they're so rigid. And merchandising equally is very manual, and therefore maybe we can do things in a more dynamic way, or begin to use AI to do that, or automatically expose products appropriately, and make sure that we're not promoting, for example, prominently with a banner on your homepage, a product which is fundamentally out of stock or partially out of stock. It's sold the popular shapes and sizes and only left with the extra small and the extra large, if you like. But that's an incredibly common thing because these things are done manually. So there's a whole way that we can do this in a much smarter way. And of course, site optimization is hard. When you start running tests, it takes a whole bunch of time. There's only so many tests that you can do. And of course, customers get used to it. And in particular, if they begin to change their behavior, you've run that test, you're relying on that test, maybe from being run some months ago. Is it still working or not? Do I know that? This is a frustration that many merchandisers have. So let's switch gears and let's go into digital category management in a bit more detail, and then get into contributed commerce in a bit more detail. So thinking about how this can work at the top of the funnel, think about how this can work at the bottom of the funnel, and how we can use this really to kind of optimize commerce in more depth. So first of all, at the very top of the funnel, we mentioned this term as well on one of the slides earlier on. This is kind of introducing the concept of the Mobigram. Now, the Mobigram is an interesting word. It has its roots effectively in the planogram, which will be very familiar to many of you. Any of you category managers, you'll live and breathe planograms. And this is basically taking the Mobigram into the digital world, specifically for mobile, where you created basically an AI-powered mobile store, which is then dynamically created for each individual. So if you like, it's an individual planogram, which is then going to automatically optimize profit for the brand or retailer and that customer, given the context of what they're looking at. Well, it sounds complicated, but it isn't really. In fact, it should sound familiar. If we take a planogram and we think about the either store layout or indeed the shelf layout, there are certain key places which are critical, right? End caps are critical. The third shelf is critical. These are all the places that we use to drive profitability. We're putting a high velocity, high margin products in there that we know are going to sell, and that's going to drive our money. So how does that work in the digital world? Well, it gets translated. In the digital world, then themes or end caps become tailored sets. So sets of products which you want to sell, which are particularly focused really around driving profitability. The third shelf is a Mobigram category browse. So basically, by allowing people to browse through the right categories so that we get them to go cross-category, we want them to become multi-category profitable buyers. Which categories we show can be quite dynamic. Which products we show in the categories can also be dynamic, those sorts of things. Cash wrap zones are now next sells, but instead of just being a sort of a classical upsell, we're very much looking at the individual customer and thinking, what do we need to sell them next for them to become a profitable customer over time. And strike zones become tailored categories where we're absolutely then picking the next category which should be showing her at this moment in time in order for her to become a multi-category and therefore more profitable customer. If you think about the concept of a planogram, what we're doing here is, whereas a planogram might be, modified, I don't know, 4 to 6 times a year or whatever, if we're doing this in a mobile environment and we're doing this dynamically, then effectively we're changing it for every customer uniquely, dynamically, the moment they arrive, to create a sort of a personal experience, a personal planogram for them, depending upon what we know, whether that's on the context of what they're looking at in the category, or individually based upon what they're looking at right now. Incredibly powerful concept, and this is absolutely the future of commerce. So how does the Mobigram work? And here's kind of some examples, right? So you can pick a whole series of these if you think about it. But for example, if you pick this one here, let me just grab a pointer. This one here, this shoe, you can see this product has a very high velocity. And what we can do is make sure that we increase exposure automatically for that product because it's high velocity. High velocity, more likely to be bought. It could be trending on social. It could be a velocity that's accelerated recently, and therefore we want to expose it more because we're picking up on a social trend or a trend that's very relevant right now. So we can dynamically change all of these sorts of things, and obviously at the same time keep aware of what's happening on inventory. We need to be able to understand that as well at the same time. So one level down, how does this work? Well, if you have 4 slots, for example, and obviously on a small screen you've got limited real estate, then in slot 1 we might put a cash machine product. So this is high volume, high conversion. Slot 2, a traffic generator. It's proven. It's a next step product. So don't necessarily buy that product, but it's a next step towards a profitable order. Hidden gem products, these are long tail products maybe that are underexposed but high margin, and we've got plenty of inventory, right? So let's expose those, give them a bit more exposure on the third shelf, the digital third shelf here. And then maybe an override slot. Maybe we've got a product which is the inventory is accelerating faster than orders. And therefore, given that change, what we need to do is we need to adjust the exposure so we're automatically exposing that product more. And as a result, we'll hopefully bring those 2 lines back corrected so that the orders then catch up with the inventory. At the same time, we probably want to suspend any additional orders that we're going to put forward for that product. So you see how the dynamic nature of this then begins to work, and you can see that then exposed here, where you've then got an individual context for the individual. So now I'm browsing, I'm looking at a particular category, and given that within those, say we've chosen a category for cash machine, within that this particular product is most relevant to my browsing behavior. So beginning to personalize within the context of the category management of what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so fairly big concepts there I've laid on you. Now let's move on and think about a little bit lower down the funnel. How can we think about getting customers to buy not just one item but on a subscription? This is particularly relevant to consumables. So if you're selling, say, dog food, why not sell a subscription to dog food? If you're selling white goods, let's say refrigerators or something like that, why not sell water filters, on a subscription so the customer automatically gets them? Very high margin stuff, right? But obviously, it's the logistics of being able to get the consumer to do that at the right time, which normally is what causes it to break. And as a result, consumers, for example, don't change water filters in the way that they should anywhere near as frequently. So continuity commerce is, if you like, auto ship on steroids. And those steroids are typically powered by AIs. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So this is basically about creating, the ability to not just buy a single delivery, but buy a subscription of deliveries, and to do that in the same kind of frictionless commerce that we were talking about earlier on. The sort of tap, tap, buy. Well, I should be able to tap, tap, buy for a multiple delivery, etc. So it's got to be really easy to do. You also need to be able to do this in a relatively easy way, and that requires a whole bunch of order management capability. And we can come back and talk about that in the questions if you're interested in learning more about that. And the way to make these programs work is you need a little bit more power behind it, because what happens is that you tend to get a churn problem kicking in with any subscription. So the dynamics and the way that this works, if you want to get to your 25%, that was the number we put out there earlier on, saying, this is compelling math, I can get to my 25%, is that, about 6% will join up front, right? 6% of people who are going to buy that particular product. The rest are going to buy, the 94% are going to buy the single delivery. Only 6% join. But those 6% become cumulative, okay? So the first challenge then is, well, for what happens with those who don't buy? Well, where they don't buy, then we can nudge them automatically at the right time. Given the individual product, we understand the complexity of when the right replenishment cycle would be. And if we nudge them at the right time, 6% will buy again. And 1% will join the continuity program. So we just increased the continuity program a bit, but at least half of it is coming from the right time nudge rather than just signing up for the subscription. The next point really gets into churn, which is how do we manage the churn problem? And we can do that basically by using a combination of surprise and delight. So nudges, maybe as simple as an email, just before a critical churn point. So if we understand when the customer is likely to churn, here shown after the third shipment, and for example, in the second shipment, we then maybe put in a little gift, or it could be an email or something, which keeps the relationship fresh, then we can revitalize it and significantly minimize churn as a result. So in the selling dog food example, why not put a free dog chew in at the second shipment, and then of course the owner's delighted. Right, they get a free dog chew. The dog's delighted, and the owner's doubly delighted because the dog's delighted. And with a bit of luck, the owner may think, okay, well, why don't I add dog chews to my regular subscription? You just made the subscription more profitable and reduced churn at the same time. This is the magic of how to make these continuity programs work. And in order to do that, AI can help you significantly in terms of which products to put specifically on continuity. You want a high margin consumable products, which consumers need, but probably they don't buy usually. You need to be able to do that in a kind of automated fashion as much as possible. You can also use continuity programs, in particular the surprise and delight, like that dog chew. Maybe you had too many of those. Maybe you give away the too many that you've got, and that helps to then sort of solve an inventory problem at the same time. So you can reduce markdowns that way. You also need to think about cannibalization and how you preserve profitability, making sure you're not cannibalizing a more profitable product. Also need to think a little bit about inventory optimization, because having got customers signed up on a continuity program, you absolutely want to make sure that you do not run out of stock. So you don't want to put products on continuity where you have potential supply problems, because that is going to unravel your 25% of customers buying regularly on continuity very quickly. So you also need an order management system that can reserve products specifically from inventory, in order to make sure that continuity gets priority. Surprise and delight can get automated. There's a bunch of AI that works that out for you. So figure out when your churn points are. Make sure you then put surprise and delight in at critical points just before that. Also, you can separate out the payment from the delivery. If you think about your internet, if you had to pay every time you used your internet, then the net of that would be, you think, oh my goodness, that's cost me 50 cents. I'm not sure I want to do that browsing anymore. That's not how we do it. We pay a monthly fee, and then it just gets hidden, right? We don't worry about it, right? And therefore we separate out the payment from the consumption. Sounds straightforward, but that can cause you challenges on billing. You might need some extra capability in your billing system to do that. And also how many times you retry, and what happens when the payment details go out of date, and all those sorts of things. There's some complexity there that can get optimized. And of course, the Mobigram concept that we talked about earlier on, very powerful as it is, can get carried through and extended in exactly the same way, so that we're figuring out which products we promote and which ones we're pushing and how we sell the continuity in order to nudge customers, so that ultimately they're more likely to buy on continuity, which ultimately then drives up our profitability. So, boy, oh boy, that is an enormous amount of content to take in a short space of time. Hopefully that's been interesting. Let me just introduce you to my new baby, or our new baby, I should say. We've been working long and hard on a new commerce platform. This is called Upscale Commerce. It's designed specifically for B2C, direct-to-consumer and retail industries. It can work either as a standalone for a particular brand, or it can extend existing commerce systems. So if you want to bring up a rich mobile or cross-channel or maybe even an in-store experience, you can do that in conjunction with your existing commerce system. It goes live super fast, 7 to 14 days go live, and it's got a ton of this AI that we've been talking about, this digital category management, and continuity built in, which is why we say it's designed specifically for direct-to-consumer. And it's also designed for a mobile first, where you can then deploy, literally at the push of a button to mobile app, progressive web, across those different channels and devices very easily, onto tablets, into desktops, kiosks, all those kind of capabilities. So you can literally build really rich, beautiful experiences in just a few days and go live super fast. Okay, so let's hoping here somebody has asked some fantastic questions, and let's get into the Q&A session. So John, do you want to be moderator of questions?
Absolutely. We only have fantastic questions. And the first one is, what is the difference between a progressive web app and a native app?
Okay, sorry, didn't cover that in enough detail. So yeah, so progressive web, there's no download, right? So that's the first point. You don't have to go to an app store. You literally just go to a URL, so a web address, and you just start using it. It's as simple as that. It means that you can do things sort of for customers who, not necessarily your best customers. Your best customers, yep, they're probably still going to download the app, but your second best customers, maybe that's the volume, would then start using a progressive web app just by going to a URL. So all you need to do is publish a short URL, and away you go. You can do most things that you can do in a native app, but there are some limitations. You can't get access to all of the sensors on the phone and those sorts of things at this point. But frankly, it's opening up quite rapidly. If you're going to build a new commerce experience, then absolutely my recommendation would be you should be looking at progressive web, probably in addition to a native app. Because it just opens up the number of people that you can reach in your target market dramatically. Great question. Thanks for bringing that up and giving me an opportunity to qualify that a bit more.
Sure. And happily, we have a couple of specific questions about your Upscale product. Number one, how does Upscale fit with SAP's other commerce products?
Okay. Good question. We've obviously got SAP people in the audience too. So very complementary. As I said, it sits alongside existing commerce products, whether from SAP or whether from anywhere else, actually, to be honest. Plugs in, plays nicely, collaborates very nicely, pulling data out of product systems or whatever, without any great issue. So either as a standalone or as a complement. In fact, many of our customers use both together because they really address kind of different use cases. The direct-to-consumer use case, for example, is quite specific in terms of some of the capabilities that are needed. We've been talking about continuity commerce as an example, and therefore, those things are very complementary.
Okay, one more. Does Upscale require us to be using SAP's ERP?
No, not at all. We connect into, or the product connects into any back end that you have, typically picking up existing data feeds you already have. That's one of the ways that we can go live really quite quickly.
Okay, well that's all the specific questions, and my experience tells me that when you have a very detailed and interesting presentation, you answer all the questions before they're asked. So I think that was the case here. However, if our attendees have further questions, they could contact charles.nichols@sap.com for more answers about this topic. So thank you, Charles, very much.
Well, thank you, John, for hosting me. It's been fun.